I am Camille Moreau, once a rising star in Paris's vibrant interior design scene, where my sketches transformed empty spaces into havens of elegance and warmth. But I set aside my dreams to become the perfect wife to Julien Lefèvre, a celebrated architect whose name adorned glass towers and glossy magazines. Our marriage to the outside world was a masterpiece, a chic Parisian apartment overlooking the Seine, glittering dinner parties with his elite circle, and my carefully curated role as the poised, supportive spouse. Yet beneath the polished veneer, cracks had begun to spiderweb through our life together, resentments buried under smiles, compromises that felt like surrenders. I didn't see them clearly then, not until the day everything shattered. It was last summer, during a trip to a sun-drenched village in Tuscany, Italy, that the façade crumbled. Julien had insisted I join him and his old university friends, Pierre, a smug lawyer with a penchant for provocation, Marc, a financier with a laugh like breaking glass, and a handful of others for their annual gentlemen's reunion. I was an unwilling guest, dragged along to maintain appearances. The air was thick with olive-scented breezes and the clink of wine glasses as we sat at a quaint café, its tables spilling onto a cobblestone street. Julien, emboldened by too many glasses of Chianti, grew louder, his charm curdling into arrogance. When I quietly suggested he slow down, my words sparked a fire. Pierre smirked, tossing fuel with a barbed comment. "Always keeping him on a leash, Camille?" The table erupted in laughter, and Julien's eyes glinted with something darker, resentment perhaps, or the need to prove a point. The argument escalated outside, away from the curious gazes of locals savoring their gelato. Words we'd both swallowed for years poured out, my frustration at his control, his accusations that I was ungrateful for our perfect life. His voice was sharp, slurred, cutting through the warm evening air. Then, in a moment that still feels like a fever dream, Julien climbed into our rental car with his friends. "Let's see how she manages," he sneered, slamming the door. Car sped off, taillights fading into the Tuscan dusk, leaving me stranded on that narrow street, the echo of their laughter mingling with the dust in the air. I stood frozen, my mouth still forming the last word of our fight. My purse held only €80 and $37, my credit cards tucked in Julien's wallet. He'd insisted on carrying them, claiming my small clutch was too full. My phone buzzed uselessly. 27 calls to Julien went straight to voicemail, texts to Pierre, Marc, and the others marked delivered but ignored. They had blocked me, a calculated cruelty that sank in as the sky darkened. The village, so picturesque by day with its ivy-clad walls and flower boxes, turned menacing in its unfamiliarity. Locals at nearby tables cast sympathetic glances, their murmured Italian a reminder of how alone I was. "He'll come back," I whispered to myself, clinging to the hope that this was just a cruel prank. But the knot in my stomach tightened as minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. The truth settled like a stone. Julien wasn't coming back, not tonight, perhaps not ever. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Tuscan sun was relentless, painting the cobblestone street in hues of gold and shadow as I stood there, abandoned, my heart pounding in my ears. The words Julien had flung at me, "Let's see how she manages," echoed like a taunt, mingling with the fading roar of the rental car's engine. My husband, Julien Lefèvre, the man I'd built a decade-long life with in Paris, had just driven off with his university friends, Pierre, the insufferable lawyer with his perpetual smirk, Marc, the financier whose laughter cut like a blade, and a handful of others whose names blurred in my shock. Their annual gentlemen's reunion in a sleepy Tuscan village was supposed to be a charming escape, but I'd been reluctant from the start. Julien had insisted, his voice smooth with that practiced charm. "It'll be good for us, Camille." "You'll see." I should have trusted the unease curling in my gut. We'd been at a quaint café, its tables adorned with checkered cloths, the air heavy with the scent of espresso and rosemary. The group was in high spirits, toasting their old university days, the wine flowing too freely for a midday meal. Julien's cheeks were flushed, his laughter louder than usual, his gestures loose. When I leaned in, my voice low, and suggested he ease up on the Chianti, his eyes narrowed. "Always so controlling, Camille," he snapped, loud enough for the table to hear. Pierre seized the moment, his lawyer's tongue sharp. "She's got you on a tight leash, Julien." Table erupted in laughter, and I felt the heat rise to my face, a mix of embarrassment and anger. I stood, excusing myself to step outside, hoping to diffuse the tension. Julien followed, but not to reconcile. The argument that ensued was a storm of pent-up grievances. His resentment of my interference, my frustration at his dismissal of my needs. Words we'd buried for years clawed their way to the surface, raw and ugly. It was then, in a moment that still feels surreal, that Julien made his choice. "You're so smart, Camille," he sneered, his voice thick with wine and spite. "Figure it out." He climbed into the driver's seat, his friends piling in, their laughter a cruel chorus. Pierre's mocking, "Let's see how she manages," was the last thing I heard as the car sped off, kicking up dust that stung my eyes. I stood frozen, my mouth still shaping the end of a sentence, my purse clutched tightly. Inside, I had €80, $37, and my passport, but no credit cards. Julien had offered to carry them earlier, claiming my small clutch couldn't hold everything. Now I saw it for what it was, another tether in his subtle web of control. The village, so enchanting in the morning with its ivy-draped walls and flower-laden balconies, turned alien as dusk crept in. Locals at nearby tables glanced my way, their murmurs in Italian a reminder of my isolation. I whispered to myself, "He'll come back," clinging to the hope this was just a cruel jest, a lesson to put me in my place. But as minutes bled into an hour, then too, the truth settled like a weight in my chest. My phone became a lifeline I couldn't trust, 27 calls to Julien, all sent to voicemail, texts to Pierre, Marc, and the others marked delivered but unanswered. I checked again, my fingers trembling, and discovered they blocked me. This wasn't a spontaneous act of cruelty, but a calculated humiliation, a message scrawled in their laughter. I was dispensable. Night fell, and the village's charm morphed into something ominous. The narrow streets, lit by flickering lamps, felt like a maze with no exit. With my meager funds, I sought out the cheapest lodging, a dingy room above a bakery, its walls stained with age, its single bed sagging under a threadbare quilt. The elderly woman who rented it to me spoke no English, but her eyes softened as she handed me the key, patting my arm as if she sensed my unraveling. I sank onto the bed, staring at my phone, willing it to light up with Julien's name. It didn't. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the creak of the building and the weight of my new reality. Julien wasn't coming back, not tonight, perhaps not ever. And in that moment, alone in a foreign land, I realized I had to choose: collapse under the betrayal or find a way to survive. I stood rooted to that dusty Tuscan street, the weight of Julien's betrayal sinking into my bones. My purse, a sleek leather clutch that once felt like an extension of my Parisian elegance, now held only €80 and $37, pitiful remnants of a life where money was never my concern. Julien had generously offered to carry my credit cards earlier, citing the impracticality of my small bag. Now I saw his gesture for what it was, another link in the chain of control he'd so carefully forged over our 10-year marriage. My phone, once a lifeline, mocked me with its silence, 27 unanswered calls to Julien, texts to Pierre, Marc, and the others marked delivered but ignored. When I tried again, my heart lurched. They had blocked me. This wasn't a drunken whim, but a deliberate act of humiliation, a message that I was nothing more than a prop in their world, easily discarded. As night draped the village in shadows, the charm of its sunlit streets, ivy-clad walls, geraniums spilling from window boxes, morphed into something alien and foreboding. The air grew cool, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and rosemary, but it offered no comfort. Locals at nearby cafes cast curious glances, their murmured Italian a barrier I couldn't breach. My whispered mantra, "He'll come back," felt hollow, a prayer to a husband who had laughed as he drove away. With my meager funds, I sought refuge in the cheapest lodging I could find. A dingy room above a bakery, its walls stained with age, the single bed sagging under a faded quilt. The elderly woman who handed me the key spoke no English, but her eyes, lined with years of wisdom, seemed to read my unraveling. She patted my arm gently, a silent gesture of solace that pierced the fog of my panic. I collapsed onto the bed, the creak of the springs echoing my fractured thoughts. Sleep came in jagged fragments, broken by the futile hope of Julian's name lighting up my phone. The second day dawned with a cruel clarity. I wandered the village, my heels clicking against cobblestones, checking every hotel and trattoria for a sign of Julian or his friends. Each inquiry met with shrugs or sympathetic shakes of the head. By evening, the truth was undeniable. They had moved on to Florence, their planned itinerary unfolding without me. The life I'd known, our sleek Parisian apartment, my role as Julian's polished accessory, was a world away, and I was no longer part of it. On the third day, I found myself before a pawn shop, its window cluttered with tarnished jewelry and forgotten heirlooms. My wedding ring, a 2-carat diamond Julian had gifted on our 5th anniversary to replace the modest band of our early days, glinted on my finger. It was a symbol of our vows, but also of his insistence on upgrading my life to fit his image. I hesitated, my throat tight, then twisted it off. The shopkeeper offered far less than its worth, but the stack of euros he handed me was enough for a new beginning, a bus ticket to a place Julian would never think to look. 14 hours later, after a grueling journey of rattling buses and fleeting glimpses of Mediterranean landscapes, I stumbled into a coastal village in Greece. Whitewashed houses clung to cliffs, their blue shutters vibrant against the endless azure of the Aegean. The air carried the briny tang of the sea and the earthy perfume of olive groves. Exhausted, hungry, and weighed down by the enormity of my situation, I collapsed on a dusty path lined with gnarled olive trees. My vision blurred, the world tilting as dehydration and despair took hold. I might have faded into that moment, lost to the heat and my own unraveling, had it not been for Sophia Papadopoulos. Her voice, sharp with concern, cut through my haze. "Kyria, Kyria," she called, her weathered hands turning me over. Sophia, an elderly woman with deep-lined eyes and a strength that belied her small frame, knelt beside me. She pressed a canteen to my lips, the cool water reviving me enough to sit up. Through gestures and a handful of broken English words, she coaxed my name from me, Camille, and guided me to her stone farmhouse, nestled among olive groves. Her husband, Costas, a farmer with a silver mustache and a cautious but kind gaze, stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth. Their home smelled of drying herbs and simmering lentil stew, a stark contrast to the sterile luxury of my Parisian kitchen. Over a simple meal of soup and crusty bread, I tried to explain my story, Julian, the argument, the abandonment, through halting words and tears. Sophia nodded, her expression one of quiet understanding, though I knew the details eluded her. Costas listened silently, his eyes studying me not with judgment but with a guarded warmth. They offered me their spare room, a simple space with whitewashed walls and a narrow bed draped in a handmade quilt. Exhausted, I collapsed into it, the scent of lavender from the linens grounding me. As I drifted into sleep, the weight of Julian's betrayal still pressed on my chest, but something else flickered, a spark of possibility, faint but undeniable. Sophia and Costas had given me more than shelter. They had given me a moment to breathe, to imagine a life untethered from the man who had tried to break me. In that small Greek village, surrounded by strangers who asked nothing of me, I began to sense the faint outlines of freedom. The days that followed my collapse on that dusty Greek path were a blur of exhaustion and tentative hope. I woke each morning in Sophia and Costas's spare room, the whitewashed walls glowing softly in the dawn light, the handmade quilt heavy with the scent of lavender and thyme. I told myself I should leave, that I was a stranger imposing on their generosity, but every attempt to depart was met with gentle resistance. Sophia, with her weathered hands and eyes that seemed to see straight through me, would shake her head, her few English words firm. "Stay!" "Rest." Costas, quieter but no less resolute, would point to my blistered feet or the rain pattering against the farmhouse windows, his expression a silent plea to remain. I couldn't bring myself to disappoint them, not when their kindness was the only anchor in the storm of my unraveling life. One rainy afternoon, as the scent of wet earth and olive wood filled the house, Sophia led me to a small wooden box on the mantel. Her fingers, gnarled from years of tending groves, trembled as she opened it, revealing a stack of faded photographs. She pointed to a young woman with her warm eyes and Costas's crooked smile, Maria, their daughter, now living in Australia with a grandchild they'd only met through grainy video calls. Sophia's voice cracked as she said, "Maria," and gestured far away, her hand cradling an imaginary child. "Grandbaby," she managed in English, tears welling as she showed me a newer photo of a chubby infant. I understood then. In me, a stranger broken by betrayal, they saw a shadow of their absent daughter, a presence to fill the hollow space left behind. I braced for resentment, for the feeling of being used, but instead my heart softened. Their sincerity, raw and unguarded, was a balm to the wounds Julien had left. I set my purse back on its hook by the door, my resolve to leave dissolving like mist under the Greek sun. Slowly, I began to weave myself into the rhythm of their farm. Sophia, with the patience of a teacher, showed me how to harvest olives, her hands guiding mine to comb the branches with wooden rakes, coaxing the fruit onto nets spread below. My first attempts were clumsy, sending twigs and leaves showering down with only a handful of olives to show for it. Sophia's laughter, bright and unjudging, rang out as she corrected my technique, her eyes crinkling with warmth. Costas, more reserved but no less kind, took me through the groves, pointing out the subtle signs of disease, yellowing leaves, brittle stems, and teaching me the precise moment to harvest for the richest oil. "Patience," he'd say in his halting English, his silver mustache twitching as he watched me struggle to mimic his practiced eye. The work was grueling, a far cry from the curated elegance of my Parisian life, where I'd orchestrated lavish dinner parties to impress Julien's colleagues. My body, accustomed to designer gyms and measured routines, protested at first. New calluses formed, muscles I'd forgotten ached, but with each day the pain lessened and a quiet strength took root. In Sophia's kitchen, a world of its own, I learned to knead dough for bread, my hands faltering under her watchful gaze. The outdoor stone oven, weathered by decades of use, was unforgiving. My first loaves emerged misshapen, either doughy or charred beyond salvation. "Practice," Sophia urged, breaking apart even my worst attempts to taste them, her philosophy simple. All learning is waste. Her acceptance of imperfection was a revelation. In Paris, mistakes were flaws to be hidden, moments to shrink from under Julien's critical eye. Here they were stepping stones, each failure a lesson in resilience. The meals we shared were a symphony of simplicity, vegetables still warm from the sun, eggs gathered at dawn, goat cheese from a neighbor's herd. The flavors, vibrant with olive oil, lemon, and herbs from Sophia's garden, were a stark contrast to the processed elegance of my old diet. My body changed, shedding the softness of city life for lean muscle, my skin glowing from sun and honest sweat rather than expensive creams. Beyond the labor, I found joy in the smallest moments. The sharp tang of freshly pressed olive oil on my tongue, Sophia's infectious giggle when I burned a batch of bread, Costas's nod of approval when I correctly sorted a pile of olives into premium and second-grade batches. These were not the grand gestures of my former life, no gala invitations, no designer dresses, but they filled a space within me I hadn't realized was empty. In Paris, I'd been Julien's accessory, my talents as an interior designer dismissed as a hobby to make way for his ambitions. Here, in this village where the sea whispered secrets to the olive groves, I was beginning to rediscover Camille, not the polished wife, but the woman who once dreamed of creating beauty with her own hands. As days turned to weeks, I started to learn the language of this place, not just the halting Greek phrases Sophia taught me over coffee, but the rhythm of rural life. The roosters crowing at dawn, the clatter of Costas's tools in the shed, the hum of cicadas at dusk, they became my new symphony, replacing the clink of champagne glasses and the hum of Parisian traffic. I began to see the farm not as a temporary refuge but as a canvas, a place where I could paint a new version of myself. Julien's betrayal still stung, a wound that throbbed in quiet moments, but it was no longer the entirety of my story. Sophia and Costas had given me more than shelter. They had given me a chance to rebuild, to find purpose in the soil beneath my feet and the community that was slowly opening its arms to me. 3 months after I stumbled into Sophia and Costas's world, the rhythm of their olive farm had become my own. The blisters on my hands had hardened into calluses. My body had grown lean and strong from days spent combing olive branches and hauling nets under the Greek sun. The village, with its whitewashed houses and the ceaseless song of the Aegean, no longer felt foreign. Sophia and Costas, sensing my readiness to step beyond the farm, invited me to join them at the weekly village market, a bustling affair where farmers and artisans displayed their wares under striped awnings, and the air hummed with laughter and the clink of coins. They set up their modest stall, arranging bottles of golden green olive oil, jars of preserved olives, and handmade soaps scented with rosemary and lavender. To my surprise, Sophia nudged me to the front, gesturing for me to engage with customers. My Greek was still halting, a patchwork of phrases learned over late-night coffees with Sophia, but I managed, stumbling through greetings, explaining the oil's rich flavor with a mix of words and gestures. Locals smiled at my efforts, their patience softening the edges of my self-consciousness. Tourists, charmed by my accent, lingered to ask about the farm. By day's end, our table was nearly bare, and Sophia pressed an envelope into my hands. "Your part," she said simply, her eyes crinkling with pride. The sum was modest, enough for a simple meal at a Parisian café, but to me it was a fortune. For 10 years, Julien had controlled our finances, doling out credit cards linked to accounts he monitored, subtly eroding my independence. This envelope, earned through my own labor, was a declaration. I was no longer his accessory. Life on the farm deepened my sense of self. Sophia's kitchen became my classroom, where I learned to craft meals from the land, grilled vegetables drizzled with our own oil, bread baked in the stone oven, its crust crackling under my increasingly skilled hands. Costas taught me the art of the groves, showing me how to read the soil's secrets and time the harvest for peak flavor. Each task, from sorting olives to mending fences, grounded me in a way my Parisian life never had. There, I'd been a curator of appearances, orchestrating dinner parties to bolster Julien's reputation. Here, my work had purpose, its fruits tangible in every bottle of oil we pressed. The village, too, began to claim me. The baker's wife invited me to her weekly coffee circle, where I stumbled through Greek conversations, earning laughter and encouragement. Tavis, the taverna owner, started using our oil, proudly displaying our bottles on his tables. Each connection wove me tighter into the fabric of this place, a community that valued me for my efforts, not my polish. 6 months into my new life, as I was cataloging oil samples in the farm's small processing shed, an email notification pinged on my phone, my old phone, which I'd barely touched since arriving. The sender's name stopped my breath, Julien Lefèvre. "I know where you are," the subject line read. He'd hired a private investigator, tracked me to this backwater village, and announced he was arriving Thursday to bring me home. Panic surged, a visceral reminder of the life I'd left, his control, his dismissal of my dreams, his betrayal in that Tuscan street. But anger followed, hot and clarifying. How dare he assume he could reclaim me, as if I were lost luggage? That evening, Sophia and Costas sat me down at their worn kitchen table, sensing my turmoil without needing words. Sophia slid an envelope across the table, not money this time, but a partnership agreement. 1/3, she said, her voice steady. "Business." "Yours." Costas nodded, his silver mustache twitching with resolve. "You choose your path," Sophia added, tapping the document. Tears blurred my vision. This wasn't charity, it was a foundation, a stake in a future I'd earned. I contacted Katerina, the village's only lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman who helped me draft divorce papers in Greek and English. I also responded to an email from Claire, an old friend from Paris who'd once mentored me in design. She'd offered a remote consulting role with a sustainable materials company, a chance to revive the career Julien had dismissed as a hobby. I accepted, tentative but resolute, feeling the pieces of my old self, Camille the designer, stirring beneath the farmer I'd become. Thursday arrived under a flawless Greek sky, the kind that made the Aegean shimmer like liquid sapphire. I was testing oil samples with Costas when the rumble of a rental car broke the afternoon's quiet. Julien stepped out, his tailored chinos and crisp shirt a jarring contrast to the weathered stone of the farmhouse. His designer sunglasses glinted as he surveyed the scene with thinly veiled distaste, his gaze landing on me, work boots, sun-browned arms, hair pulled back in a simple braid. "Camille, what's happened to you?" he asked, his voice laced with shock and condescension. I straightened, my heart hammering but my voice steady. "Life happened, Julien." He offered a perfunctory apology, calling his abandonment a drunken mistake, and urged me to return to Paris, to the life we'd built. But his words rang hollow, a script from a man who'd never truly seen me. I thought of the years I'd shrunk myself to fit his world, my designs shelved, my friends pushed away, my independence eroded. "This isn't about making a point," I said, stepping forward. "It's about making a life." Sophia and Costas stood behind me, silent sentinels, as I handed him the divorce papers. "I'm a partner here now," I told him, gesturing to the groves. "I found purpose, community, freedom, things you never valued." His face cycled through shock, anger, and wounded pride, but I was no longer swayed by his charm or his threats. The Camille he'd known had died in Tuscany. The woman before him was someone new, forged in the soil of this village and the kindness of strangers who'd become family. Julien's rental car vanished down the dusty road, the divorce papers clutched in his hand, his eyes shadowed with defeat. I stood beside Sophia and Costas, the olive groves stretching around us like silent guardians. The man who once defined my world had expected me to crumble, to crawl back after his cruel lesson in dependence. Instead, his betrayal had flung open a door to a self I'd forgotten, a Camille Moreau who was fierce, independent, and rooted in the ancient rhythms of this Greek village. The Aegean sparkled in the distance, a mirror to the freedom I'd claimed. From this journey, I've learned 5 truths. First, betrayal can be a gift, breaking chains you didn't see. Second, true community values your heart, not your status. Third, independence is earned through small, brave steps. Mine began with a bus ticket and a pond ring. Fourth, purpose grows from work that feeds your soul, like tending these groves. Finally, you are never too broken to rebuild. Every scar is a seed for growth. Sophia squeezed my hand and we turned toward the farmhouse, my home now. The evening's work awaited, oil to bottle, bread to bake, a life to live. Julien had meant to teach me helplessness. Instead, he set me free to become whole. If my story resonates, please like, share, and subscribe to hear more tales of resilience. Your support keeps these journeys alive.